2.5 years ago, I got my very first DSLR, the Canon T2i. At the time, it was an old camera. I got it on eBay for a little less than $200 in a kit, with the kit lens and 3 batteries. And honestly, I was extremely excited. Before that, all I'd had in terms of camera was my phone and little cheap point and shoots I'd had over the years. Getting the T2i was the introduction for me into the world of large sensor cameras, the world of DSLR photography, and honestly, what began my career here on Erickson Films, the Canon T2i. And to this day, it's still the main camera I'm using. Maybe you're wondering, after these years that I've been on this channel, after the many videos I've made, why haven't I upgraded? Why haven't I chosen to use something else? So to get this right out of the way, my reasons for loving the T2i are purely subjective, as with anything in the world of cameras. And honestly, my main love for this camera goes right back to the color science. You'll hear people go on and on about Canon color science, but that's honestly for a good reason in my mind. Canon color looks great right out of the camera. The way I shoot is I turn sharpness off, I turn contrast all the way down, I turn saturation all the way down. In Premiere Pro, I add them back, and voila, I'm done. My image looks great. I don't have to spend hours color grading and trying to find the right look. At least to my eyes, it looks beautiful right out of the camera and cinematic. The kind of look I'm going for is attainable right out of the Canon color. And this brings me back to what makes this camera such an amazing value. Back when Canon made this camera, at this point many years ago, I don't think they were aware that this camera and the 5D Mark II were really going to launch what we now call the DSLR revolution. In the case of the T2i, you were getting something around the size of a Super 35mm sensor, all in a really small, compact body, which was compatible with all of Canon's EF lenses. To this day, nothing about that package has changed. The difference is you can find this camera really cheap on eBay. I got mine 2 years ago for $180 in a kit. I imagine today it's probably the same or even cheaper. We're living in a time now where when people look at cameras, they tend to evaluate them mostly on specs. Can it shoot 4K? What's the bit rate? What are all these different spec sheets saying about the camera that make it good? In my mind, that's not really how you should approach a camera, at least for something like YouTube. To me, what makes a camera like the T2i so good to this day is the sort of image it puts out, I guess the way that image makes me feel as a creator. There's something I love about the Canon image. I think it's just something to do with the fact that it has that really pleasing color. It has this really great rendition of skin tones. I don't know if it's necessarily the most natural in the world with all these things, but something about the image just feels good to me. Something about it looks pleasing to my eyes, and clearly to many others. I think that when you're looking for a new camera, there are things you have to evaluate beyond purely specs. In my case with the T2i, I was presented with many options after buying this camera as far as upgrading. There was the Panasonic line, which offered really great cameras in the sub-$1,000 range. Same with Sony, and I'm not knocking either of those brands. In fact, I think as far as pure specifications goes, there's no question the superiority of those cameras. However, why I've stayed with Canon, despite how clearly they have not put effort into making their DSLRs video-friendly in the recent years, is, like I said earlier, simply because of that image. When I do end up upgrading from this camera, it's probably not going to be until I can afford something like the Canon C200, an actual cinema camera. Because right now, the only real issues I have with this T2i are it doesn't shoot in 4K. I can live without that. And the dynamic range is not exactly phenomenal. But when I'm in a situation where I can control the lighting, when I'm in a situation where I don't have to shoot in 4K, which for me is all the times I shoot in, I don't see any other reason to use a different camera. If you're looking for a new camera, if you don't want to spend a lot of money, I really recommend looking at the Canon Rebel series, whether it be the T2i, the T3i, any of those cameras that are older at this point, but still performing really well and still used by so many creators to this day. I think what makes the T2i such a compelling package nowadays is, well, mostly the price. You can go and find this kit really cheap on eBay, get it set up, throw on a 50mm lens like I did, which costs around $100, and you're shooting cinematic video. If you're checking out the videos here on Erickson Films, every single one of them was shot with only the Canon T2i and the 50mm lens. That's it. And I think I've produced some really, really nice cinematic looking footage over the years that in many ways rivals and at times exceeds the quality you get from more expensive, newer cameras from different brands. As I said earlier, I think when you're looking at something like a camera, you have to go beyond simply specs, beyond numbers, and realize it, as cliche as it sounds, there's something emotional about a camera, about the image it puts out, something that either resonates with you or doesn't. And when I was looking and researching cameras a couple years ago, when I saw the footage you could get out of the Canon T2i, out of any of the older Rebel cameras, I was blown away. I mean, I had this misconception before I bought my first DSLR that you had to buy something expensive. You had to buy something at least $1,000 to get footage like that. But here I was with a camera that I'd spent $200 on, getting footage that to this day still impresses me. It might not be super sharp, but I guess the question is, does that matter? Does the sharpness of the footage matter? Does the resolution of the footage matter? Does the bit rate, or bit depth rather, is that extremely important to you? Or would you rather have something that feels, I don't know, pleasing, looks pleasing to your eyes, makes you feel happy, I guess, as I'm talking about ideas here that are obviously not tangible, that are not quantifiable, but I think there is something really human about the image I get off this camera, something that feels real to me. Like I review this footage and I remember being there, and it doesn't look like a phone's footage, for example, of something where I was. There's no incredible sharpening going on. There's not this sort of artificial digital look to what I filmed. And for some people, that's what they want. They're looking for a more digital broadcast kind of look. But if you're like me, if you were looking for something more cinematic, something, I don't know, more artistic in a way, I think something like the T2i is a really incredible value proposition, especially now as we're entering into 2019. And I'm not knocking other camera brands, like I said earlier. If you're a Canon, if you're into Sony, that's great. Panasonic. The number of other camera brands that at this point are making really great cameras. I just think, at least when you're in something low cost, if you're looking for something low cost, I can't help but recommend the Canon T2i even this many years later. Because while it might not be the most technically advanced, most high-spec camera, there's something about it that I just love. I love shooting with it. I love the feeling of it in my hands, the tactile response I get from the buttons. And I don't think I'm alone in that feeling. Van Neistat, Casey Neistat's brother, the last film he made, if I remember correctly, was done completely on the T2i. And in an interview where he was discussing why he chose to use that camera, he was mentioning what I just said, the sort of feeling he gets from that camera, how well he knows it, how that, whenever he used it, he knew where all the buttons were, what all the buttons did, as simple as that sounds. And I think with creating videos and films, that's something you just can't ignore. The way the equipment works with you personally, the way you connect to it, and your familiarity with it. So, obviously we're living in a time now where Canon cameras are becoming increasingly less popular, and I think for many valid reasons. However, if you're thinking about getting a new low-cost camera, and you've heard a lot of bad things about Canon, how bad they are for the money, I'd recommend you look at my videos. Look at someone like Simon K from DSLr Guides videos. Evaluate whether for you, what's most important is the specs, or the more emotional quality and feeling you get from the image off a camera. Well, anyway, this is probably a little more philosophical than you guys are used to from me, but check out the T2i. I don't think you'll be sorry. This video was in no way sponsored by Canon. I have no affiliation with the brand. I'm way too small for any of you going to comment that. But I love their stuff, and I'm going to continue to use it, regardless of what other people tell me about how apparently bad Canon is. So, just wanted to share my thoughts on that. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful holiday season. Until next time, Christian from Erickson Films, signing out.